Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order when you check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Sports Pictorium Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. If he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL helmet poster. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1.
You can picture them streaking down the ice, or winding up for the point and firing a big blast past the goalie, delivering a crushing blow back in the defensive zone, hoisting the Stanley Cup high over their heads as they celebrate winning the most prized trophy in sports. Guys like Bobby Orr, Doug Harvey, Paul Coffey, or Denis Potvin, or Ray Borque, or more recently Nicholas Lidstrom, Drew Doughty, or even Duncan Keith. But when the conversation turns to the greatest who suited up and played defense in the NHL, one name is very often left out of the conversation. A 3-time Norris Trophy winner who many have forgotten. And next, on Sports Forgotten Heroes, we're going to take a look back at his Hall of Fame career. We're talking about the great Pierre Pilote.
This is Sports Forgotten Heroes, a tribute to the stars who shaped the games we love to watch and the games we love to play. Stars who provided us with many thrills, but when their time was up, they faded away. We'll take a look back at their spectacular careers, their moments of fame, even if it was just for one season or just one game. And now, here's your host, Warren Rogan.
Hello and welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes. So glad you've tuned in as we turn back the clock and reach into the sports history books to talk about the greats and many times forgotten heroes who played the games we love to watch. Today, we're going to hit the ice with a terrific author and member of the Society for International Hockey Research, Waxy Gregoire. Now, Waxy, if you remember, was also my guest for a wonderful conversation about the great Red Kelly. Well, today, Waxy will be joining the podcast to talk about, I think, one of the least spoken about and great blue liners of all time, Pierre Pilote. Consider this, Pilote didn't start skating until his teens, didn't start playing hockey until a few years after that, and he didn't make his debut with the Chicago Blackhawks until he was 24. Now, that's a lot older than many of today's rookie players. But during a fantastic 14-year career, 13 with Chicago and one, well, let's say very uncomfortable season with the Toronto Maple Leafs, Pierre won 3 Norris Trophies as the NHL's best defenseman. 3 times he finished second in Norris voting, and 2 other times he finished 4th. He was an 8-time All-Star and was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1975. Before he got to the Blackhawks, they had only made the playoffs twice in the previous 10 years. With Pilote in the lineup, Chicago missed the playoffs each of his first 2 years, and then they didn't miss again until after he had been traded. That's 10 straight years in the playoffs with 3 trips to the finals and 1 Stanley Cup Championship. Simply a phenomenal career. Now, before we get into today's show, just a little house cleaning. Please follow Sports Forgotten Heroes on Twitter at SportsFHeroes. I make daily posts about the podcast. I run a few polls and clue you in on upcoming guests. Follow Sports Forgotten Heroes on Instagram. Look for the Sports Forgotten Heroes page on Facebook. And check out SFH on the web at sportsfh.com. There you can find out more information about our guests. I have links to the books they've written to make it easy for you to order a copy. Links to more information about the forgotten stars I talk about, and you can make comments about the podcast, our guests, or even suggest ideas for the podcast as well. That's sportsfh.com. And as always, please leave Sports Forgotten Heroes a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, and I'd love to read your review. Okay, now, Pierre Pilote. He broke into the NHL during the 1955-56 season with Chicago. This, of course, was when the NHL was just a 6-team league, so there weren't many roster spots available. And even though Pierre started skating at such an advanced age, he showed an aptitude for hockey that was recognized very quickly. And while he enjoyed playing the game, he still had a love for a different sport that he wanted to play even more: baseball. And I'm going to get into all of that now with the co-author of the book, Heart of the Blackhawks, Waxy Gregoire. Waxy, welcome back to Sports Forgotten Heroes. So glad you could stop by again.
Well, that's my pleasure.
Hey, man, I just want to ask the first question being this. Of all the players who ever skated in the NHL, why write a book about Pierre Pilote? What made his story so interesting to you?
Well, you know, at the age that we got a hold of Pierre, he'd been in contact a couple of times. People approached him to write a book, but it's similar to Red Kelly. They weren't ready. He wasn't ready. And he happened to move into our territory. Matter of fact, he lived 15 minutes away from me. And so we contacted Pierre at the time. He'd been inducted into the Sports Hall of Fame, and he was starting to settle into the community. Mm-hmm. And Pierre told me one time, he says, you know, it's very difficult for a hockey player to garner roots in a certain place because we're always moving. We're going to Chicago to play, but we're going back to Fort Erie where we live, or we're going somewhere else for the summer. And he also had a couple of business under operations too. He says it's very hard to settle down. When they chose a place to live up here, he got embedded, and he started to meet a lot of people, got to know a lot of people. So when we approached him, it was actually David Dupuis who approached him. He says, for the Sawchuk book, he approached Pierre Pilote and said, can I interview you on Terry Sawchuk? Mm-hmm. And Pierre said, you come over here and I'll interview you, but you got to help me carry the couch downstairs. so then that's how David and I got to meet Pierre Pilote. And then Pierre started to come out to some of our events. We invited him to. He said, sure, you know. And we asked him, I said, you know, would you be interested in doing a book? Because David Dupuis had done the Terry Sawchuk book. And he thought about it. He said, yeah, sure, let's go ahead and let's do it. Mm-hmm. And so that's how we got underway.
Interesting. When you spoke to Pierre and you were doing the research for the book, what did you find out about Pierre that surprised you the most?
Well, let me talk to you about a little bit about how his wife saved a lot of his articles, paper clippings and such that he had. And then, of course, we backed up some of our own research, etc. But what surprised me the most about Pierre, he is a wise man. Mm-hmm. He would not do anything without thinking about it first, about articulating it. And he is almost similar to a lawyer. He had the answer before you asked the question. He knew. And what surprised me about Pierre is you weren't pulling the wool over his eyes. He's shrewd in business. He did very well in business. And now when you think about it, it's not surprising he became captain of the Blackhawks, right?
Right, sure. I mean, the guy was a great player,
you know,
and a leader.
Yeah, and some of his conversations, when he surprised me, was he said, I was on the ice, and all of a sudden, it clicked in. On certain events through his career, one in Buffalo, another time in Chicago, certain events clicked into his mind where he could see the timing of things unfolding in front of him. when he started explaining that to us, because I've never heard that from another hockey player, that was amazing. You know, it's like he stepped it in another gear, and he always told me, he says, I always looked at a guy, okay, that guy, I'm not rated as high as that guy, but I'm going to be better than that guy. And he always set little goals like that. It was unbelievable how the tenacity he had to make himself better.
Yeah, and you know, what is the most amazing part about Pierre's story, at least to me, is this. He's a Hall of Famer. He's a Norris Trophy winner. His name is on the Stanley Cup. And yet, as a child, not only did he not play hockey, he didn't even skate. His interest in skating and the game didn't come about until he was in his teens. How unusual is it for someone to excel to the degree that Pierre Pilote did and not take up the game until so late?
Well, that's factual, big time, because and he watched a little bit, and then he didn't have power skating. He didn't have an instructional school. He didn't have back in those days. You probably didn't have the greatest coaching in the world, especially when you first start out. But it was his just his tenacity and his will, and his favorite sport. He didn't tell you, is baseball. He always wanted to be a ball player. That was his favorite sport, not hockey. Whereas him and Fergie Jenkins, the great Chicago Cub Hall of Famer, became the great pitcher. He wanted to be a hockey player. Anyway, and those two guys really became tight, close friends.
What made Pierre so good? Tell us about his game. I mean, again, he didn't start till later. What made him so good?
Well, again, he would inspire to be better than the next guy, but he was tenacious, and he didn't take any crap. You know, his father had a bit of a boxing background, and his father taught him how to box a little bit. And Pierre's growing up French and English, and where he was in northern Quebec, you had to fend for yourself. There was no, you know, my mother's going to take care of me as such. You had to fend for yourself, and he learned how to fend for himself. So he took that same body of his, which wasn't very big. I mean, we're talking 5'10", and he didn't take any crap. Just kept pursuing.
And you said that, you know, he really loved baseball, but at what point and what was the situation that turned him on to skating and to hockey?
I think it's the fact that they moved to Fort Erie, and he wasn't even really indulged in the baseball too much there as well, and he just got a liking to play hockey, and he watched it, and he just went out and, you know, tried out for a junior B team, and I can do that. And I mean, there's not many people who can just say that. I can do that. I'm just going to go do it. And he did it.
Yeah, and not only did he do it, so he's playing junior hockey, but at the same time, during the off season, he still went back to baseball. So let me ask you this. How good was he in baseball, or what did he lack in baseball, or that he didn't like in baseball that he finally said, I'm going to pursue hockey as opposed to baseball?
Well, he in baseball, he was playing, started with a little bit of fastball, but he ended up playing hardball. And he enjoyed certain positions, and he became a pretty good pitcher, as well as playing other positions, as you do in minor baseball. And their team was good enough that they won some Ontario championships in different categories, bantam, midget, juvenile. And I think he was being looked at as well in baseball. But then he had that accident where he hurt his ankle at the same time when he was playing hockey. So I think it came down to a decision, but there was more showing towards the guys who were scouting and everything else that were looking at him. There was more interest in hockey than there was in baseball. So I think he vied that way, and he started to get a few more options thrown at him, towards hockey. So that, that came down to, well, I guess I'll play hockey.
And he did. He caught the eye of some hockey scouts, and, he played junior hockey, and eventually he ended up going to training camp with the Buffalo Bisons when Buffalo was a farm team for Montreal. And in that period, he got to get on the ice with guys like Rocket Richard and Elmer Locke. And how much did he learn and understand how much more he needed to improve in order to not only be on the ice with these guys at training camp, but to actually play competitively against them or with them at the highest level of the game?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was a student. And we talk about in the book about the first time when he was playing junior, and he went to Toronto, and he watched the hockey game, and he was paying certain attention to certain guys, and mostly defense. And, of course, he seen Bill Barocco, how Bill Barocco was throwing the hip around and taking guys out. And Pierre studied that move, and I know he went back, and he says, I went back, and I worked on that move. You cannot believe how much time I spent on that, because it didn't happen overnight.
The Barocco hip check.
Yeah, he called it the Barocco bump. And he said, I spent time training and that's what he did throughout his career. He would follow certain guys and watch certain players and try to pick up and steal the good qualities they had. One of the guys he watched a lot was Doug Harvey. He watched Doug Harvey control the game. He kept his eye on Doug, and Doug was older, more prominent player and such. And of course, you learn in the scrimmage too when you're playing against guys like the Rocket and that, and they put a couple of moves on you, and you better make an adjustment to counteract those guys the next time they come in, because you won't be around very long if you don't.
While we're on the topic of junior hockey and the minor leagues, one of the areas you discussed in the book was minor league hockey, due to Pierre playing there. And, with the Buffalo Bisons. Now, I'm curious, and maybe I'm misunderstanding this or the game has changed. When Pierre was working his way through juniors and then the AHL, Buffalo, if I understand correctly, was an affiliate of the Montreal Canadiens. Then, through a series of moves with ownership, they became an independent, and then they worked out a deal to become an affiliate of the Blackhawks. In today's game, affiliates have working agreements with their parent clubs, and most of the players, I think, on the affiliate team are under contract to the parent club. But from the way I read your book, that's not the way it worked, was it? I mean, after all, the Bison players went from possible careers with Montreal to possible careers with Chicago. How did all that work?
Well, we all have to go back to the way when they started signing the A form, the B form, and the C form. And once you signed those certain forms, you became the property of. And you'd sign the C form for $100 to the New York Rangers. Well, you're a New York Ranger property, and they would tell you where you were going.
So could he have been property of the Rangers at that time and played for Buffalo?
I'm just using that as an example.
Okay,
He wasn't property of the Rangers. He became he didn't sign a C form. He just played hockey for when Pilote signed him. Basically signed him to play. I shouldn't say that. He did sign a C form. He became property of with Rudy Pilote out of St. Catherine Teepees. And then St. Catharines, once you finish your junior age, they had to go somewhere if you weren't qualified to play in the NHL. So he did go to Buffalo, but Buffalo, as you say, wasn't an affiliate to Chicago at that point in time. It was a split farm system. It was split between Chicago, I believe, and Montreal, where they had both teams were sending guys down there. Now Montreal and Toronto were both the leaders with affiliate associations where they had teams all over the place. The other 4 teams were just starting this process to improve their farm system. Toronto was right on the bit with Frank Selke Sr. He started that farm system in Toronto, and then when he went to Montreal, they really started to build up the farm system using a lot of the French, Canadian boys, etc. And the other teams were picking it up. You have to remember that, the 4 American teams were quite often in the basement, except for Detroit. Detroit was a powerhouse from 48 right on.
So,
but you're right by saying that finally Chicago purchased Buffalo, and they were affiliate farm system to the Chicago Blackhawks.
Okay.
So all their guys coming up that were any good were going to Buffalo eventually, and then on to Chicago.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. So now after a couple of years, 3 years or so with Buffalo, Pierre, his trajectory to get to the NHL is crazy, considering when he actually started skating and playing the game. So it wasn't too long before he was graduating, we'll say, from Buffalo, getting his chance. He gets called up to the Blackhawks to play for Tommy Ivan's Blackhawks. Now, that first game was it was really interesting. Even his first shift. When Pierre was called up, he didn't think he would play, so he tells his father not to attend the game. He thought, oh, well, I'll just be sitting the bench the whole time. That's not what happened. Tell us about his first shift, his first game, and then how bad he felt that he told his father not to attend.
Oh, he was in big doo-doo for that one. But the coach then was Dick Irvin Sr.
Oh, right, Dick Irvin.
And Dick Irvin, as we know, had got turfed from Montreal and was a very senior coach, been around the NHL for a long time. So under the assumption, Pierre says, I'm going to play with the big boys, and Dick's been around for a long time. Pierre for sure said, I might get a shift, maybe 2. When he told him he was in the starting lineup, yeah, he couldn't believe it. He his jaw dropped in the dressing room, and then he knew after the game that he was in big trouble because he had told his father, "Now don't bother coming to the game." And his mother would have came as well. Don't bother to come to the game. I'm not going to get any ice time.
Didn't they offer to drive him there or something too?
They offered to drive him there, everything. Yeah, and he was in deep trouble. His father was really, really upset with him. Didn't happen again.
Well, why was he recalled? Why was he called up? What was it about his game that that Dick saw in his game, and what was it, why was he needed on the big team?
They had an injury, and they were kind of short, and the availability of who was available to get called up, and at the time he was probably the best or as good as the defenseman they had in the farm system. They had seen he had some potential, and they said, you know what, we'll give him a shot. Call him up. We need another guy up here. They only went with 4 defense normally, 5 sometimes. And that first game, he played like one of the 4 defense.
Right, but his first shift, if I understand correctly, it wasn't exactly the greatest shift. He was probably starstruck.
He was embarrassed. He was nervous as hell. Your first shift in the NHL, you're starting, and a veteran like Todd Sloan, give him the old dippity-doo, and Pierre never forgot that, I can tell you. And one of those things that is never going to happen to me again. And it's funny, it's funny how Dick Irvin Sr. never said anything to him on the bench.
And he made him get out there for the
ammunition. They didn't have 7 defense on the bench to say, "Okay, buddy, you're riding it."
Right, they needed him out there for
his, what you had.
Yeah, and they needed him out there for his second shift. He's get back out there, and that was surprising to him as well that he was given a second shift.
Well, in the NHL as well, they didn't have the same number of guys on the bench as they do today.
Mm-hmm.
There was only a certain number of guys you could have on the bench, and it was a lot less than it is today. You know, usually went with three lines and 5D. And it didn't even have a backup goalie.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
You address that a few times in your book.
Yeah.
Hey, so he gets called up, but then he's sent back down. I guess like for the next half season or year or so, it was sort of up and down for him. When did he finally make the impression to stick?
Oh, that's a good question too, because I think I don't think it was at the beginning of the year. I think it was partway through the year he got called up to stay.
Right. Yeah, I have that. His first season was 55, 56, and he played 20 games. And then he made the team, if I understand correctly, in 56,
that's
57.
correct.
So he must have made a heck of an impression in training camp the following season.
Yeah, he was ready. They've seen that you know he had his experiment with the 20 games he played, and he was ready to come up. Absolutely.
Now the Blackhawks at that time, they were not that good a team. I mean, they didn't qualify for the playoffs until he was up on the team for a couple of years. So tell us about the Blackhawks when Pierre first joined the team and just how bad they were.
They were cellar dwellers. I mean, they had they made some trades, but it was basically tinkering. Detroit, because the Norrises were brothers, threw them a bone now and then. The moves didn't really occur till what's his name, Glenn Hall, and Ted Lindsay got themselves in the hot water in Detroit, and that's when they got moved to Chicago. Then Chicago, a young guy by the name of Bobby Hull was coming in. He was only 18 years old, so we started to get a few pieces put together. And Rudy Pilote was still coaching. His tenure was going to deplete in a few years from now, but they started to pick up a few guys from their farm system. They made a few trades that did work out, but none of their trades were. They were putting bodies in, but they weren't really nothing major as far as trades go. But they were signing the odd guy, cast-offs that weren't too bad. Like Al Arbor signed. He got out of Detroit, and he came into Chicago as a fifth defenseman, which was he didn't mind that because he said, Detroit was hard to get any ice time, and Chicago looked like they were starting to improve their team with the number of players they had. And you could see some of the guys in their minor system that were going to play hockey. So it took a while to. I mean, they just have some retreads, but Eddie Litzenberger came in. They made a trade for Eric Nestorenko to Toronto, and a few other guys. Stan Mikita still wasn't there yet.
Well, the other thing I think the other thing too is that they finally got rid of Dick Irvin, and one of the moves that they made to help improve the team was to bring in Rudy Pilote as coach, and you've mentioned him a couple of times. Tell us a little bit about Rudy and what kind of coach he was and what role Pierre had in bringing him to Chicago.
Well, Rudy knew all these guys from the St. Catherine Teepees and part of the affiliation with the Buffalo Bison, so he was quite familiar with a lot of them, and the guys knew him. They liked Rudy, but Rudy was a rah-rah guy, as more opposed to I'd call it a strategic coach, as you would see today. But he was a likable guy, and they liked him. But and his style of play was he didn't get on their backs too much, but his style of play was depending on the players they had, and they became an offensive team. Probably cost them a few Stanley Cups because they didn't play defensive enough. But he was familiar with a lot of the guys they were bringing in, so that kind of worked out okay. And then, of course, they're going to, they changed their manager, eh?
Right.
So that helped as well because they had a good relationship with Tommy Ivan.
Right, and then, like you said, they started to bring up some some other young guys, and I want to talk about two of them in particular. The first being Moose Vasco. He and Pierre were, they were paired together on defense. Tell us about that pairing, how well the two of them got along on and off the ice, and just how they work together. Here you have Pierre, the offensive defenseman, and Moose was more like the defensive defenseman, but it was this great pairing, and the fact that both of them were so young so they could grow together.
Yeah, you're right. Moose came in, I think it was 2 years after Pierre, and they put them together. Pierre was a smaller guy, where Moose was a bigger guy, so Moose was a stay-home defenseman. Pierre would take the puck. He would move it with Bobby, and they would go. And Moose would always have his back. They became really tight. Of course, they roomed together. Their families knew each other well. Pierre talks about some great stories in the book and about poor Moose. They really became close friends. It's in hockey when a lot of guys get moved around. You get traded here and there. And today coaches move players around. They don't stay with the same partner. But Pierre and Moose were always together. They were on the same team, the same lineup all the time. Now, inseparable.
Yeah, they were roommates.
They
on the
learned
road.
each other's. They learned how to play with each other so much that it was, second nature. Moose would know when Pierre was going, and Pierre knew that Moose was always back there. So they worked great.
Now,
they had, and it was funny that Pierre will tell stories that they'd go back to the apartment and there'd be 24 beers in the case. Moose would drink 22 and Pierre would drink 2. Yeah. And then Pierre would beat him at crib all the time.
Well, Moose came in, Pierre's first full season, 56-57. That's when Moose came in, and
okay.
he was the age of 21, and Pierre, his rookie season, he was 24. But Chicago was starting to piece this thing together. Pierre's third season, his second full season, the Blackhawks call up another key component to the team that they would become, Bobby Hull. And during the time that Hull and Pierre played on the Blackhawks together, man, those two got along. They could read each other. And I just find it really interesting that you have this defenseman and this, one of the greatest goal scorers of all time in Bobby Hull, how well they played together from day one. Talk about the relationship between Bobby Hull and Pierre Pilote.
Well, that relationship really took off when, of course, Bobby's a young guy when he first came in, and they got asked to go play in Europe. The Rangers were going to play an exhibition round against the Boston Bruins in several cities, but not all the Rangers could go. Andy Bathgate and such, they had business commitments, so they couldn't make it. So Much Patrick, he needed some players to go over. So he asked Bobby, and he asked Eddie Shack, and he asked Eddie was with the Rangers at the time, but he asked Bobby and Pierre to go. And Pierre and Bobby really, because they're two Blackhawks, they really hit it off together. And Bobby started playing on that big ice surface in Europe. And Pierre said to me, he says, that's when Bobby really hit off. He had that big ice surface, and he had room to move, and he played outstanding. And Pierre was an offensive type of defenseman. He was learning more and more play defense, and so he learned give and go with Bobby, and they worked that steadily. Of course, they became pretty tight friends off the ice as well. eventually they'd get into business together. You know, but it's funny how they just clicked with each other, and Pierre would say, and no, Pierre didn't handle the puck or give and goal like that with Stan Mikita. He not even near as much as he did with Bobby. And him and Bobby had a thing going, and Bobby knew where he was, and you know, it was unbelievable how they worked together. And you know, when we did this book, I had an interview with Bobby. Well, Pierre come over with us. We were with Bobby for 6 hours. You know, talking about a lot of the stuff didn't even hit the book, but you could tell just the relationship between two of them, how close they were. You know, and at that time back in the Blackhawk day.
I think a lot of people would find it very interesting to know that Pierre Pilote and Bobby Hull, at least for a tiny bit of time, actually wore the sweater of the New York Rangers.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Not too many people know that. Hey, so back to Pierre. You know, and you said this earlier, it sounds like he was a pretty reasonable guy, someone who was easy to get along with. What was his personality like, and why was he so easy to get along with?
Well, I think his background as a French Canadian didn't have a whole lot. Didn't come from, you had to work very hard to earn a dollar. You know, your father worked for the railway, didn't make a lot of money. You know, money was precious. So you worked hard, to achieve those things. And Pierre was a likable guy. He got along with a lot of guys. Of course, there's some guys you didn't get along with if you played against them. But on the whole, though, he didn't hate people. That's for sure. But he got along with his guys, and he knew that it was a team game. You had to play as a team. You had to get along. And the story he told me is when Dolly St. Laurent came in from Montreal, and Ted Lindsay was the same way. He said those guys made sure that the team stuck together off the ice, which was a very key component. Now, when Pierre eventually becomes captain, he knows how important that is. Off the ice. Don't go off on your own.
Right.
Especially when they're out of town.
Right. And you tell a story late in the book about how important it was to be a team, to do things together as a team, to participate with everybody as a team off the ice. And they had a young Dave Dryden on the team, and they would go out for some beers and dinner, and they'd split the bill, and Dave would disappear. Talk about that. That was pretty amusing.
That was a good story because that was when Pierre was the captain, and they were in Montreal, and they said, "Well, we're going to go out," because there wasn't just Pierre observing some of the stuff. Some of the guys would go to Pierre and, "Hey, Pierre, you see what's going on with this guy?" And Dave Dryden was just basically coming in as a backup goalie anyway. So, but he was with the team, and they noticed that he'd have his one beer, one sandwich, call the waitress over, pay the bill, and leave the restaurant, what they were trying to say is, we want you here as part of the camaraderie. It's a team. We're out of town, and we want the team to, get together and bond. So that's when Pierre said, "Okay, boys, we're going to this restaurant, and we're going to call. I'm having a team meeting." And the rule was, when you have a team meeting, everybody has to show, everybody has to stay. So just as not Ken Dryden, but as Dave Dryden was ready to leave, Pierre says, "Well, we're going to have a meeting," and so he couldn't leave. And then they all started eating and drinking and hooting it up. And then when the bill came, it came to $35 each because they were splitting the bill amongst all the players. And all he had was a beer and a sandwich. So he was pretty perturbed that he had to pay a lot more than his share. They're basically trying to say, we're a team.
Right.
We have to bond. But Dolly St. Laurent was one of the first guys that came from Montreal after winning all those Stanley Cups. and he came to Chicago, which he really didn't want to come to Chicago because he was with the great Montreal Canadian teams. But he was the guy that would host many parties just to keep the boys and their wives together, close bonding. He said that's the way we have to do it. And Ted Lindsay was a strong component of that when he came, but Ted was a little older when he got there.
Sure. On the ice, you know, we're talking about how reasonable and likable a guy Pierre was. On the ice, though, he had somewhat of a mean streak, didn't he? I mean, he was pretty damn rough and tough when he had to be, and he didn't take crap from anyone.
No, he didn't get all those penalty minutes matter of fact, he often said, there's no way I'm ever going to win the Lady Byng Trophy. That's not one trophy I want to win. He was no intention of ever winning the Lady Byng Trophy. And you're absolutely right. And his early days, he was in the penalty box a lot, maybe compensating for the lack of skill at the time. But he didn't. He knew that he had to show up or he'd be gone because he wasn't a big man. And that just goes to his character.
Right.
But yeah, he had a mean streak, and again, he knew a little bit of how to box, and he didn't take any crap.
And
no
he was able to stand his ground. Yeah, he led the league in penalty minutes one season, but you know, he had 169 in 60-61. But he was usually right at the top of the list of the league, and definitely at the top of the list of penalty minutes for the Blackhawks. Hey, you know, another point I'd like to discuss here, Waxy, is how the game of hockey was different off the ice for the players as well, in that they had to fend for themselves when it came to signing contracts. You tell some fun or interesting stories about contract negotiations with Tommy Ivan. What was negotiating a contract like?
Well, first of all, there's no such thing as an agent. Well, they didn't have an agent until Eagleson showed up in the late 60s. But they didn't have any agents, and they were told explicitly that you shut your mouth. Once you get a deal, you're going to keep it quiet. And that was throughout the league. The other thing is they never got a copy of their contracts. When Pierre had his contract signed, they would sign the contract and they'd say, okay, if any player wanted to see his contract, they'd have to go into the office, ask the secretary to see the contract, and she would only give him a limited time to look at it. Oh, you weren't allowed to copy it, write it down, or anything like that. You never got a copy, and you got a quick glance at it, and that was put away. And there's different stories of how each player was treated differently. Even Tommy Ivan had a phony button underneath his desk for the phone to ring, and he would use that on certain players. The player would be there, and all of a sudden the phone would ring, you know, and he'd make like he was talking on the phone, making a phony trade up or something else. These were all tactics that they were using.
And he would have a blank book of some sort. He'd look in the book as if he was looking at numbers or analytics or something. As he's
Al Arbor told me that story. He told me that story when Al Arbor was living down in Long Beach, down in Florida. I remember I told you I was down there for 2 winters. Well, I went and visited Al Arbor at the time, and just to talk about those days. And he said that's when he left the room and he was shuffling his papers around and he looked at the papers and there wasn't any writing on any of the papers. They're all blank. It was just the technique that every guy was treated differently. And of course, they're lined up outside and don't say anything when you leave. I mean, this was done as well. Jack Adams was famous for, keeping the pay scale down. He didn't know what they're making. I mean, Gordie Howe didn't find out what was going on until Bobby Bond told him, he says, you're keeping the league price down. I'm making more money than you. and this was in, the late 60s.
And were they always 1 year contracts?
1 year. Pierre finally started to sign a 2-year contract a little later on. But basically they were 1 year, then they got to 2 year. And then I think there was the odd rare contract that might have gone to 5 years, but not very often. Beliveau had a 5-year contract, I think, that paid him X number of dollars per year, and he wasn't a low pay compared to the other guys.
You know, all this is going on during the time of the original six. And, you know, for our listeners, that's Montreal, Toronto, Boston, New York, Detroit, and Chicago. Is it fair to say that during this time, Chicago was the most troubled of all the franchises? I mean, they weren't exactly killing it on the ice, and they weren't killing it in the stands either. I mean, the fans weren't really showing up to the games. So what was it like for the players when they would play a game at Chicago Stadium and there's 4,000 and 5,000 people in the stands? And what did the league do to keep this team afloat?
Well, that's what happened, and that's why places like Detroit and that ended up sending the players, because they were pitiful. I mean, Pierre's wife used to talk about it. Says it was awful. You'd go to the game, and the cameras would flash to a section where there were some people to show like there was a crowd there, which in essence there wasn't. There wasn't. I think most of the noise came from the Barton organ, but you know, and the ice wasn't always the best in Chicago, but. You know, the Norrises were trying to make $1, and they would make it any which way they could, but they certainly weren't making it on their hockey team because they weren't getting great crowds. The neighborhood, maybe of where the Madhouse was located, wasn't the best location either. There was all kinds of, I think, executive decisions made with the Hawks that kept them down. I mean, the Norrises were out to make money, and it didn't matter what it was from.
It's funny you mention how the camera would swing to a section that had fans in it to make it look like they were fans in the stands. I think it was in your book that I read when CBS finally started to broadcast games and they come to Chicago, they had every fan in the stands sit on one side of the ice. So when the camera would show a fan in the stands, it looked like it was packed. Meanwhile, the side that the camera was on, there was nobody sitting there.
That's correct. And it wasn't until Bobby got there and Glenn Hall and Ted Lindsay, and they started bringing in some players, and the team started to show success, and then the crowd started to show up. And when they finally started making the playoffs year after year, the crowds became pretty good. But the Blackhawks were one of the last teams to have TV coverage, and they were really balking the system. They thought the TV was going to take away from the paid attendance, which in essence it didn't. But that's the way it is.
Now, when you look at the history of the Blackhawks, they lost in the semifinals, or the first round of the playoffs in 1945. They didn't qualify in any of the next 7 seasons. Then in 52-53, and this is still before Pierre gets there, they lost in the semifinals again, and they didn't make the playoffs in 53-54, 54-55. 55-56, and that was Pierre's first year. They didn't make it his second year. They didn't make it his third year, but finally, in 58-59, they make the playoffs, and they were something else. So before we get to the playoffs, and you sort of mentioned this just a moment ago, how did the rest of the league help the Blackhawks as far as putting talent on the Blackhawks roster?
Well, when Ted Lindsay, tried to start the players' union, and he got turfed from he got kicked out of Detroit. Glenn Howe had a disagreement with Jack Adams because he didn't take any crap from Jack, and he got turfed. And then there was Jimmy Thompson that came from Toronto. So all the teams except Montreal, all teams that had representatives vying for the union, they all got displaced because they were going to get broken. The union wasn't going to get started. They were going to move guys around, The only team that didn't move anybody was Montreal because Doug Harvey at the time was the vice president, so-called, with Ted Lindsay, and Frank Selke said, I can't move Doug Harvey. I mean, they'd hang me in Montreal. So that was the beginning of and then Tommy Ivan, when he came the manager, he knew talent, and he started to make some moves along with the farm system to bring in some decent players for Chicago, but they were awful for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, in the 45-46 season, Chicago, it was a 50-game season, and Chicago went 23-20-7. And it wouldn't be until 1960, the 60-61 season, that they would finish over 500 again. I mean, it's crazy to think over 20 years between 500 seasons. But that 58-59 season, they sure did come close. It was a 70-game season at this point. The Blackhawks win 28, lose 29, and tie 13. They finish third in the NHL, and they go up and they have to play the Montreal Canadiens in the semifinals or first round of the playoffs. And man, those playoffs were something else. Chicago, as I said, finally finishes in the top four, and they're matched up against Montreal. Tell us about that series. I mean, there was so much to it.
There was a lot to the series, but Montreal was such a powerhouse at the time. I mean, their lineup was an all-star lineup. I mean, you were playing Montreal, you really had a hard time getting in that lineup because they were just. I mean, they had the Richards, they had Belleville, they had Dickie Moore, they had they had everything going, Jacques Plante and everything else. But the Blackhawks, they came to play. They had, they had Bobby, and they had Stan Mikita now, and they had some pretty good centers. They had Pierre and Moose in one pairing, and then I can't recall if it was Dolly Saint Laurent was playing with one of the other guys. So the Chicago was getting better, but they're still not a Montreal Canadian team yet.
No, but what they did do...
You got to learn from experience.
Right, and the other thing they did do, they got their fans behind the team. I mean, more than 18,000 people showed up for Game 3. I mean, that must have been stunning to the Blackhawk players to skate out on the ice and see that many people sitting in the stands on home ice. And, police had to be called in because... The fans were throwing garbage and whatever at the players and the refs. Someone even got into the stadium with a gun. Tell us about how about what the atmosphere was like and how the fans, or why the fans finally turned out to see this team play.
I just relate it to the fact that they brought some caliber hockey to the town. Having said that, we call it Madhouse in Madison for a reason, and the great story, and Pierre tells that story when it was Red Story's last game, where he got threatened with a gun by a fan, and they had to call the cops in and had the fan removed. And they didn't really remove the fan from the building; he just moved from a different location. I find that hard to believe. They didn't take him away in chains, but. They would throw everything on the ice. I mean, there was no, and that caused a lot of disruption. But back then, they just come up with the scrapers and get it off the ice. Referees are under a lot of pressure, and to cover those games, the Red Story was a good referee, and of course the referees knew all the players as well. There was only so many referees. There's only 6 teams. You knew the players. You knew their capability, their maneuvers, etc. But
Pierre, at that point, seeing the fans turn out, seeing what hockey could really be like playing for a team that's making the playoffs, that really motivated him, didn't it? I mean, he finally was like, wow, this is something else.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is fun. This is fun. This is hockey is fun, and And through the year, he would go up and down. You'd win some, lose something. But you know what? Once you get into your system, hey, we got to make the playoffs, and we got to take a run here. And they had the talent. They started going, and they started winning awards. I mean, they had all-stars in their teams from that point on. Again, like Bobby Hull and Stan Mikita and Glenn Hall, first and second team all-stars. So they had a pretty good lineup, pretty good, strong offense. And if you're a hockey fan, you're going to become a hockey fan when you see that kind of offense. Everybody loves scoring. Chicago was a scoring
right,
team.
And Pierre was also gaining a lot of confidence, not only in his game, but what he meant to the team off the ice as well. And he was finally learning the business side of the game, and he's even stood his ground when it came to signing his next contract. It wasn't easy, but like you said, players would sign out of fear, but he finally stood his ground. So what kind of respect was he getting from management?
Well, there was a negotiating game, but he finally started having your chosen second all-star, first all-star. If you win a Norris, now you have some leverage to bargain against. Chicago was starting to improve. What's Tommy Ivan going to do? Is he going to let Bobby Hull walk? Is he going to let Pierre walk and have the team, start to tank a little bit? I don't think so. So they just played hardball as far as negotiation goes. But Pierre, you had to develop a nerve and say, I'm not signing for that. So when Pierre had a few of those accolades under his belt, he says, no, I'm going to negotiate a little harder. It took nerve to do that. And then Bobby pulls off the stuff where he'd just go right to the owner because Mr. Norris liked him. He'd go right over Tommy Ivan's head. Now, Pierre would never do that. He would never do that.
How important was Pierre to the turnaround of this team? I mean, 9 of the previous 11 seasons, they didn't make the playoffs. But in Pierre's final 10 seasons with Chicago, they made the playoffs every year, and they made it to the finals 3 times, and they won the cup the 1 time. How important a player was Pierre Pilote to the once more-bound franchise?
He was the defenseman, and then I know they talk about Bobby Orr being the upstart rushing defenseman. Now that's not totally the case. Bobby was an extremely he really, really pushed it to a different level. But Pierre was an offensive defenseman as well. I mean, Bobby Orr's scoring record surpassed Pierre's. That's who he surpassed to gain the scoring record as a defenseman. Pierre was offensive-minded as well. So he was moving it up. He wasn't the stay-home defense. He changed the game a bit by doing that. But he had the guys, like he had Bobby up there and a few other guys that could go. So his style of play helped change that as far as the offense. So, you can say he was taking those steps to change the way defensemen played. And of course, he learned how to block shots when he was at Buffalo. So his defensive game wasn't lost just on offense.
Yeah, talk about his, how he played defense. One of the things I did read and in research was he would get down on the ice and block the shots, and he was still also a quote unquote offensive defenseman. So he had a really good all around game.
Yes, he learned. When he first started, he was a left shot. And they wanted to put Frank Eddles taught him a lot. And you play the right side. Well, I'm a left shot. And he explained to him why he should play that side. So Pierre listened to him and bought into it 100%. Okay. And Frank Eddles taught him how to go down and block shots. So, like, Pierre was a student right from the word go. He seen somebody do something that he could pick up on. He would do that. He learned all these, I won't call them tricks. I'll just call them, they were tricks of the trade. But he learned them. study them and use them.
Mm-hmm. And he learned a lot of it by watching, like you said earlier, his idol, I guess, Doug Harvey.
He watched Doug Harvey. He watched several players and watched, well, isn't that an interesting move? I got to try that someday, And when he first started playing with Whitey Stapleton, Whitey wasn't familiar with the NHL style, and he said, no, when it's shot into your corner or my corner, you go get it because of the angles that the player was skating on. So he, when Whitey Stapleton came into the league, he was telling Whitey certain things on how to play and where to play, positional play as a defenseman and such, And Whitey Stapleton became a half-decent offensive defenseman as well, after Pierre left.
Well, the Blackhawks, like we said, they made the playoffs that first time around in 58-59 with Pierre. They repeated almost identical the next season. The same exact record, 28 wins, 29 losses, 13 ties. They end up in third place, and they play the Canadiens again in the semifinals. This time they're swept out. But then 1960-61, this team puts it all together. Sure, they finish in third place again during the regular season, but they're over 500. They win 29 games, lose 24, and tie 17. This time, though, they think they've got a way to beat the Montreal Canadiens in the semifinals. And that was a rough, tough series. What can you tell us about it?
And then that's exactly part of the strategy they used because of the players they had. They had some players that would go in and just every chance you get, you take the hit, you make the hit, and Montreal still had a good goaltender. They still had Plante, they still had their guys, but Chicago had some guys that were as rugged. And let's face it, they had the $1 million line, they had the Screw line, and they had guys that were Reggie Fleming. They had Murray Balfour. They had some tough guys in their team, and so they gave Montreal every time they turned around. They were on them. They learned to check a little bit that year. Unfortunately, they didn't do it later on, but they learned to check really hard. With the rule fans, that's how they took Montreal out. Matter of fact, Toe Blake complained about their maneuvers and how the referees weren't calling this and that. And today,
but in
Chicago, and of course they had Glenn Hall. People ask, Pierre will tell you that Glenn Hall was the best goalie. A lot of people say Terry Sodrick was the best goalie. He says, no, the best goalie I had was Glenn Hall. He'd tell you
they
that.
They called him Mr. Goalie too.
That's right.
He was something else. So.
And you need good goaltending.
Absolutely, even today you do. I mean, that's how the Blues won the Stanley Cup last year. Jordan Binnington.
Yeah, you don't have good goaltending, you can kiss it goodbye.
Yep, exactly. So, as much as Toe Blake complained and as rough and as tough as it was, the Canadiens manned up at the end. And they actually went into Chicago's locker room, including Toe Blake, a couple of the players, and they congratulated the Blackhawks for a great series and finally dethroning the vaunted Montreal Canadiens. The Canadiens respected them, didn't they?
Exactly. Absolutely. Like Toe Blake was a winner, but he knew that any team could be knocked off if you weren't on your game. He knew that. He found that out against Toronto as well. That he knew that. And Toe Blake was astute to know that. They did 5 in a row. They changed their personnel a little bit, but then when Chicago beat them, they started moving guys out of Montreal. But Chicago had guys from Detroit, when Chicago beat Detroit, the guys from Detroit dressing room came in and shook some hands.
But I also read that was they were also Detroit was a little bitter afterwards. I mean, again, another rough and tough series. The Blackhawks overcome everything. That's all leading up to this, and they beat the Detroit Red Wings to win the Stanley Cup. And some of the players were bitter about that. They talked about how the league saved the Blackhawks by arranging to get them good players. They neglected to mention the fact that the Blackhawks signed great amateurs, or, drafted the great amateur players like Pilote and Bobby Hull and Moose Vasco. Detroit was a little bitter that they lost the Stanley Cup Championship to Chicago.
Well, that was Jack Adams, because Jack Adams had been around for a long time. He's seen a lot of the stuff that went on with the Norris family, and some of the occurrences. Now, hey, Jack Adams created part of that because he's the guy that pissed off Glenn Hall and traded Ted Lindsay. So when he comes back with that comment, hey, don't you asked for it. And this is what you got. Now, when Detroit made some trades with Chicago, when you look at some of the trades, there was never any spectacular donations given by Detroit, except if they made the mistake of giving away Glenn Hall. Ted Lindsay was at the longer end of his career, even though he was solid in the dressing room and good player, and et cetera. But when they got rid of Glenn Hall, they made a huge mistake.
Yeah, I mean, Glenn Hall was just a spectacular, solid, steady goalie. Hey, in this playoff of 60-61, how pivotal a role did Pierre play?
Pierre had to, if you're going to win it, you play hurt. You got a cut here, you got a bobble there, you play hurt, you got to give it 100%. And they gave it. They gave it because it only comes around once in a while. I think to a man, like you take Bobby Hull, he's being shadowed by every guy under the sun. He's got to fight through that because they do have to score some goals. And anyway, they played through the toughest. And they found out how tough it was to win a Stanley Cup, even if there's only 4 teams vying for it.
Mm-hmm. And the following season, they improved their record again during the regular season, winning 31 games. But once again, they finished third in the regular season. And again, they take out Montreal in the semifinals. But this time, they lost in the Stanley Cup Finals to the Toronto Maple Leafs 4-2. Talk about that disappointment. This didn't sit well with Pierre.
No, this didn't sit well with Pierre because he could sense that, yes, the Blackhawks could score. They made some moves in the offseason. Even now that they won the Stanley Cup, they got rid of 4 or 5 guys, and they had a couple of newer guys come in. But he was disappointed because their style of play was not conducive to playoff hockey. He'd tell you that. He says, we're too used to playing that offensive game, and did have that other gear to switch into when it came to playoffs. You had to bar the kitty door. You had to tighten down, and Toronto used some pretty good techniques of they were clutch and grab. They'd there was always questions whether Chicago made their ice muddy at times. Well, Toronto doctored their ice as well, to suit their hometown. There was all kinds of things like that as well. Pierre was very disappointed that Chicago only won 1 Stanley Cup. They felt that they probably should have won 3 or 4.
Well, the next 3 seasons after that loss to Toronto in the finals, we're talking 62-63, 63-64, and 64-65. Pierre certainly established himself as the top defenseman in the league. He won the Norris Trophy 3 straight years. Talk about his game, how it absolutely took off, and just how good a player Pierre became. And he did this, by the way, at the ages of 31, 32, and 33. But again, he didn't pick up the game until he was in his teens. So as far as hockey years are concerned, he might have been a little younger.
He might have been, but you know what? The fact that he was such a great student, now he was such a steady defenseman on both ends of the ice and knew how to play the game so well. Of course, he's also now the captain of the team, where he's taken on. The year after they won the Blackhawks, it's funny that they couldn't give the captaincy to Bobby, they couldn't give it to Stan, and so it was Tommy Ivan and Rudy Pilote made the decision without anybody else. Pierre, you're a captain. You're the captain of the team, so he had the added responsibility to show leadership, on and off the ice to the team. And he did. Certainly his points kept increasing year after year. He wasn't slacking off. So, and he had a lot of great written reports about him. He must have been a likable guy to the reporters as well, because a lot of the guys were writing great articles. Red Fisher is a great fan of Pierre's. Red Fisher, who was a strong Montreal writer for the Gazette, just loved Pierre. He said, he was fantastic what he did. Steady as a rock.
But yet some of the fans would turn on Pierre periodically, wouldn't they? There were once in a while there were some boo birds.
Yeah, you make a mistake in Chicago, and I don't think Bobby could ever get booed, but you make a mistake in Chicago, and they're not too forgiving. And he might have got the odd booze somewhere else when he laid a check on somebody, because he was still, even as a Norris Trophy winner, he's still laying out a few guys.
Mm-hmm. In 65, 66, the Blackhawks finally overcome finishing in third place, and they finish in second. But they lose in the semifinals to the Red Wings, and then 66, 67 comes along, and the Chicago Blackhawks, to that point, put together one of the greatest seasons in the history of the NHL. They go 41 wins, 17 losses, 12 ties, 94 points. They score 262 goals. I mean, they're setting records all over the place. And this is the year, for the first time in 40 years, they finish first and they break the curse of Muldoon. I want you to tell me about that. But again, like I said, they set so many single-season records. But they lost in the first round to the Maple Leafs. This had to be one of the most gratifying regular seasons Pierre Pilote ever experienced. But in the end, it was terribly disappointing. Talk about that 60-61 season.
Big time. I mean, I think they had 4 first team All-Stars and 2 second team All-Stars. I mean, it was just an offensive juggernaut. They were having their way with the league. They're just flying. Everything's rolling along. Now, the curse of Muldoon, when Muldoon was coaching the Chicago Blackhawks many years prior to, he said, "You guys will never win a league championship ever." You put the curse on them, but they broke the curse, and that was lots to talk about that. And the boys had won first place with several games to play, so they had a lot of room. But again, I say that we all talk about the Chicago strategizing about the goaltending with Toronto, and they didn't want to play against Bauer, and then Bauer got hurt. They wanted Sawchuk in there, because they knew that Sawchuk was kind of, he was hurt as well. What happens? Johnny's hurt. He can't go. So they bring in Sawchuk. Well, Chicago thought, well, we got them now, man. And, of course, Terry Sawchuk just come up the last 2 games and just thrown them out of control. Even after Bobby Hull had taken, I think it was game 5, he took a shot and put it right off Terry Sawchuk's shoulder, and they think he's not even getting up. who they're going to put in net now because Johnny's not well. But he got up and he just stoned him. He said, Pierre talked about that last game. He said we couldn't, after Chicago went ahead, I think we got 2 shots on net in the third period. They just check, held, grasped, everything. We couldn't move. That was a disappointing season for him. Probably the biggest disappointment of all. Everything was progressing gradually, and they won 60-61. But he said that year really hurt. And of course, after that, they made some dumb trades. So Chicago's never going to get back to that.
Hey, Waxy, we started off talking about, and we've mentioned it a couple of times, how Pierre started the game late in life, and yet here he is winning the Norris Trophy 3 years in a row. How good was Pierre, and how good might he have been had he took up the game earlier?
That's really hard to say, but I would expect that he was a runner-up in that fourth year as well. He lost to Jacques Laperriere, the Norris Trophy, but then he had acquired some injuries. But it's really hard to say if he would have been, if he'd have started at 10 years old. Who knows? Because again, he picked up things so quick. He was a real student. So who knows where he would have gone? I would assume that he would be in the NHL a lot sooner than he was.
When you think of hockey's greatest defenseman, and I'm a hockey fan, and I know the name, or I knew the name Pierre Pilote, and obviously after doing all the research for this podcast, I know so much more about Pierre, and I would certainly consider him to be one of the greatest defensemen to have ever played the game. But before that, I think like many hockey people, hockey fans, when you think of hockey's greatest defensemen, you think of Bobby Orr, Denis Potvin, Doug Harvey, Ray Borque, even Paul Coffey. Not many would say Pierre Pilote. Is he overlooked?
Yeah, I would think he's overlooked, but that question is always taken. When did they play hockey? The game has changed so much in different eras, but back then, the original 6, certainly he was overlooked. Each team had some, we only had 4 defense per team, so if you say there's 24 defense in the league, you're not talking about a whole lot of guys that. I mean, there's some Hall of Famers certainly, but they're not the caliber of Pierre. So certainly he's overlooked at that time period.
I mean,
Let's face it, Bobby
was a superstar.
Yeah, and I don't think he made the top 100. Now, there's a lot of players that have played the game, and again, you have to take it into context of when they played.
Do you think that also could be because he only won one Stanley Cup?
Well, I would hope not. There's some guys that have, Raymond Borque won one Stanley Cup, and he only won it because he got moved to Colorado.
Yeah.
Brad Park didn't win a Stanley Cup. And he was a good defenseman. I don't think they rate him. I don't know if they rate Brad Park higher than Pierre, but I mean, they put some new defensemen on that list of 100, and I didn't think that was right. But anyway, it's really hard. But I think yes. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer. He's got a sweater retired. Is he a superstar? He's pretty close.
Mm-hmm. Why did the
eventually?
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, why did the Blackhawks ultimately trade Pierre to the Maple Leafs?
His age, I think, is one. And what they got back for him, Pierre will tell you that Chicago made a good trade because they got a young Jim Pappen for a defenseman that was, past, his mid-30s. So he says that they made a decent trade. Pierre's getting I don't know if they've seen signs as well. Pierre in his own mind, I think, was starting to think out of the box as far as, and he did that once he got to Toronto. He started to lock into businesses. He already had a couple businesses prior to leaving Chicago. He had a laundromat. He was in the car business, and many people don't know that he even had a Tim Horton franchise for a short period of time. But he kind of, what are you going to do? He was upset with the trade.
Yeah, talk about that, how upset he was about the trade and how he found out about the trade.
How he found out the trade is he had a reporter call him and tell him, how do you feel about the trade? What are you talking about? What are you talking about the trade? Well, you've been traded to Toronto. Well, I mean, you think that somebody in management would have held off reporting it to anybody and had called him in, but it wasn't the first guy they'd done that to. I mean, a lot of guys were treated like that.
And it was a PR guy, PR guy from Chicago that ultimately made contact with him. Nobody from management. I mean, what this guy meant to the team.
PR guy said, I've been trying to get a hold of you all day. He says, well, my wife's been here all day and the phone never rang. So the PR guy was, giving him a pile of crap as far as that went. I mean, now, Pierre's 1 year in Toronto was not.
Yeah, he didn't enjoy his time there. He never felt like he fit in. That they didn't even want him there. So it wasn't a good year.
No, there was some undermining going on with some of the players, and Punch's teams were a lot different than Chicago. The way they played, but there was some undermining, and even to this day, Pierre never trusted Bob Pulford. Back then, he felt that Bob Pulford was spying on him, and of course, Bob Pulford became a very instrumental in Chicago when Bill Wirtz was running the squad, so he wasn't a Bob Pulford fan.
Mm-hmm.
Don't forget it wasn't until years later before until Rocky Wirtz took over, where Pierre got invited back into the fold in Chicago, part of the family.
Mm-hmm.
So he had been away from Chicago for a long time, but his stay in Toronto was not very good. He felt undermined by certain players, and he felt maybe he rocked a few guys. He certainly doesn't have a lot to say about Mike Walton.
Mm-hmm.
That's any good. And he said he even played with Mike Walton's father. Anyway, he had an offer to go after. I'm not sure if we talked about
to the
that
Rangers. You said that. He retired from the game. He said, "I've had enough." But Emile Francis, the coach of the Rangers, still saw something in Pierre, and the Rangers were putting together a pretty good team at that point, and Emile Francis tried to talk him out of retirement and even, threw some more money at him. But, I guess Pierre had enough.
Yeah, he was going to send Pierre, he's going to sign Pierre to the minor league team, but he says, I'm going to just send you down there for a while and I'm going to call you up. And he had a 4-year contract.
That
was for 4 years. That Pierre said, no, I'm done. My heart's not in it. So he had a business.
Mm-hmm.
He had to purchase a luggage business, and as Pierre is, he focuses on, that's one thing he does. He focuses on his business.
Mm-hmm.
So as a hockey player, he would have given his full attention to hockey, and now he owns a luggage business. He would give his full attention to the luggage. Of course, he was still working for Sears Roebuck. I'm not sure if...
but he promoting their hockey equipment.
That's where he became real tight with Fergie.
Ferguson Jenkins, and he did something with Ted Williams too, I think.
Ted Williams was a fishing guy as a representative for Sears Roebuck, and Pierre was the hockey guy, and Jean-Claude Keely was the skiing guy, and Fergie Jenkins was the baseball guy. And
what a lineup!
Pierre and Fergie used to go quite often on, promoting the business. And Pierre used to meet up with Ted Lindsay as well. Of course, Ted Ted Williams was adamant fisherman, you know. And actually, Fergie Jenkins loves fishing, and I know Pierre did some fishing. So I imagine they had a good time.
I would imagine so. Hey, when we look back on the career of Pierre Pilote, what did he tell you that he was most proud of?
I think it's the still little things that where, you know, he was able to step up and better himself and, you know, gain a position on a team, you know, by making the squad, all those little instrumental little steps to get him to where he was. He was really, I mean, once he was selected for the Hockey Hall of Fame, he really took that responsibility. Like, I think that once he got there, that was you know, that tells you you're very successful in your field of business. He really took the Hockey Hall of Fame to heart. He spent a lot of time when any time that Hockey Hall of Fame had a function to raise money, you know, golf tournament or a hockey pool draft, or Ron Ellis would call him up and say, Pierre, we got a thing. Can you come down and give us a hand? They'd always have a celebrity with some guys who donated money. Pierre was there all the time. Didn't have to ask him twice. And I think he really felt that bonding with the Hockey Hall of Fame guys was the climax of his whole career. So I have to say that after seeing everything he'd done and how he spent, you know, his last years involved with the Hockey Hall of Fame, he was really proud to be a member of the Hockey Hall of Fame. And then, of course, when he got chosen to be one of the top 6D on the stamp collection with Bobby Orr, Doug Harvey, Red Kelly as a Red Wing, Harry Howell as a New York Ranger, and who was the sixth guy, Tim Horton as a Maple Leaf. Those 6 guys were picked to be on the stamps. You know, another proud moment. All Hall of Famers and such. You know, he was really. I think that he really carried that pride on being a Hockey Hall of Famer, because they had events going on year after year after year, and he showed up to all the Hockey Hall of Fame inductions. You know, every year they have them, he would show up to support other guys going in. So he was really proud of that.
What a career. I mean, you know, he played for 13 plus years, and I say plus because his first year was only he only played 20 games. But in all of that time, do you know that only twice did he finish a season with a negative plus-minus rating? I mean, just what an incredible career. So to wrap it all up, Waxy, what should we all know and remember about Pierre Pilote?
We should know that Pierre Pilote was a really common sense great guy. Firstly, he was a team player, committed to team play. Team was the name of the game. You know, he got some accolades, yes, but the team was first and foremost, and he got along with guys. And you know, and after he retired, you meet some guys, and he really got along with the guys after as well. When he retired, you know, he wasn't standoffish or anything like that. Where some guys still are, but he wasn't, and he was, you know, he was a great human being, because there's more to life than just hockey. And Pierre embedded himself in the community, and I'll tell you, he used to come to our Sports Hall of Fame functions here in this little town of Penetanguishene, and everybody knew him. They didn't ask Pierre about, can I have an autograph? They'd say, Pierre, how are your tomatoes? Are they growing this year? And, you know, he was that just normal Joe Blow guy, but yet he's a Hockey Hall of Famer.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's the kind of guy he was. He'd talk to you. He'd talk to anybody, you know.
That's awesome.
And he'd talk to you about. And here's an outstanding thing about Pierre. His autograph to this day is immaculate. There's certain guys like John Beliveau, Johnny Bauer, Ted Lindsay, Gordie Howe, Pierre Pilote, outstanding autographs. and I was with him signing books, and the lineup was, you know how long the lineup
Sure.
can be. He took the time to sign every autograph the same way, very legible, professional. And he'd get some of the autographs signed, and he'd stop, and he'd maybe do 5 or 6 because he might know his wrist getting maybe a little sore or whatever. And he'd talk to the customers, you know, how you doing? And he'd talk about different things with them. He'd get them to talk about something. He'd be chatting with them, and didn't matter if there was 60 people in the lineup. And I'll tell you my story when I went to Chicago.
Sure.
So Pierre says, we're going to Chicago. We got an invite. I got to do some signing. You want to go down with me? I said, sure. The things we met, you know, the people I met there were unbelievable. And we were watching the game out of the ambassador's box. So there's Bobby Hull, and there's Dennis Savard, and there's Tony Esposito. But Pierre's signing that day. So he goes down after the first intermission to sign. So you figure he's just signing autographs in the first exhibition, first intermission. Well, I didn't see him for the second period. I didn't see him in the second intermission. I seen him when there was about 5 minutes left in the third period. I said, where you been? He said, well, I was signing. He says, are you telling me the lineup had never stopped? He says, no. And he signed everybody's autograph.
Awesome.
He never seen any of the game.
That's awesome.
Never seen any of the game. You know, that's just, you know, he says, hey, that's show business. You got to do that. And it's amazing that, he's just like you and I, buddy, just Joe Blow, but he's a Hall of Famer.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Oh yeah. Great guy. I miss him. He's been gone now. I used to spend a lot of time with him because he was so close by. I would spend a lot of time with him just talking about whatever.
Uh-huh.
It wouldn't even be about hockey. We'd be talking about tomatoes. We'd be talking about this.
That's awesome. Those are the kind of guys you really you respect, you want to hang with, and you like, and you could call them a real friend.
Oh, and joke around, and his wife passed away before him, but she was a beauty. She was such a lovely person. You know, you get together with them, and they were so much just down to earth people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hey, what are you working on now? Anything?
Well, I did. I'm sorry to say this, but I did a book with Brian Trottier, and they've had the material for almost a year now, and they still haven't published the book. And I want to tell you what a great story.
Yeah.
And another good guy, down to earth, and one hell of a hockey player.
Oh, no doubt. One of the greatest. What he meant to the Islanders, that great line of Trottier, Gillies, and Bossy, you know, that is one of the greatest lines in the history of the game.
And if you want to, I'm hoping that they do something with that damn book pretty soon. But his upbringing, because he grew up out west, you know, south portion of Saskatchewan, and that's a whole different life to us guys from the east.
Mm-hmm.
And what a story!
Mm-hmm.
What a story! You know, cowboy. You talk about a story, a kid growing up, man.
Well, maybe we'll have to do something
Anyway.
about that.
Yeah, when it comes out, absolutely.
All right. Well,
I think you're going to really enjoy the story. It's, you know, it's on the same lines as the Red Kelly and the Pierre Pilote. It's just, and he had other aspects to the game, because not only did he win 6 Stanley Cups as a player and 1 as a coach, or assistant coach, but he was also president of the Players Association for a long time. And that's an interesting component.
Oh, I'm sure it is. Well, I am looking forward to talking to you about that, and whatever else we could dig up. Waxy, thank you so much for joining me on Sports Forgotten Heroes. This has been terrific.
Yeah, anytime, my friend.
Pierre certainly enjoyed a wonderful career in the NHL. One of his coolest stats, I think, is this. The NHL started keeping track of plus-minus in the 1959-1960 season. So that stat was noted in each of Pierre's final 10 seasons. Only twice did he end a season minus. In fact, twice he led the NHL. In 1963-64, he was a plus 31. And in 1966-67, he was a plus 54. Not bad for a defenseman. In the playoffs, the year the Blackhawks won the Cup, 1961, he led all scorers with 12 assists, 15 points, and a plus 11. Pierre Pilote was, well, simply stated, one of the best to ever play the game, and I'm thrilled we had the chance to talk about him with Waxy, who, by the way, is really a terrific writer, and I encourage you to pick up his newest book about the great New York Islander and Pittsburgh Penguin, Bryan Trottier, when it comes out, or his book on Red Kelly, or the book Heart of the Blackhawks, which details the career of the great Pierre Pilote. Next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes, baseball is back. Yep, spring training is underway, and I thought we'd head out to the Diamond for a little baseball talk with author Jeremy Beer for a conversation about a player who many think just might be the second greatest to ever play the game, right behind Babe Ruth. We're talking Oscar Charleston. That's next time. For now, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.
We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.